That'll be $28.42. The cashier's voice cut through the hum of Brookshire's grocery store in Shreveport, Louisiana. The sound of beeping scanners, squeaky carts, and impatient chatter all seemed to fade as Ralph reached for his debit card. $28.42. 5 items in his basket: bread, eggs, milk, rice, and chicken thighs. Essentials. Nothing more. He swiped his card. Beep. Declined. A sharp buzz. Loud. Final. Heads turned. Ralph blinked, forced a quick smile, and said, "Let me try again." He slid it slower this time, as if careful movement might change the result. Beep. Declined. The air thickened. Someone behind him exhaled loudly. "Man," the cashier's smile faltered. "Sir, it's not going through." Ralph felt sweat bead on his forehead. He leaned in. "Run it again, please." She nodded, tapped a few buttons, slid the card herself. The same merciless sound. Beep. Declined. A woman in line whispered, not quietly enough, "He doesn't have the money." Another chuckled under his breath. Ralph's throat went dry. He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and refreshed. The numbers lit up the screen like a cruel joke. Available balance, $2.17. $2.17. The cashier lowered her voice, almost pitying. "Do you want to put something back?" "Put something back? Out of 5 items? What would he even drop? Bread? Milk?" His dignity had already been shredded. He shook his head quickly, snatched the card, muttered, "I'll come back," and walked away. The groceries stayed on the counter. The line moved forward without him, as if he had never existed. Outside, the Louisiana heat pressed against him like a punishment. He climbed into his beat-up Honda Civic, slammed the door, and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. 34 years old, a full-time job, and he couldn't buy groceries. His reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at him. Tired eyes, wrinkled shirt collar, a man who looked far older than his years. He pounded the steering wheel once, hard. "This can't be it. This can't be my life." The words echoed inside the empty car. That night, his apartment felt colder than usual. The fridge hummed, nearly empty. A jar of pickles, half a ketchup bottle, one lonely slice of cheese. He dropped onto the sagging couch, head in his hands. The grocery store humiliation replayed in his mind on a loop. Declined, whispers, stares, every sound carved deeper. Finally he stood, walked to the kitchen table, and pulled out an old notebook. Dust clung to its cover. He flipped past blank pages until he found space to write. His hands shook as he scribbled, "No more broke." The letters dug into the page, pressed hard enough to tear the paper. Beneath it he wrote something he had once heard but never practiced. "Save 10% of every paycheck. Always. No excuses." He stared at the words. 10%? It sounded impossible. How could he save anything when his balance was $2.17? Yet the thought wouldn't let go. What if he had started a year ago? 5 years ago? What if he had even a small cushion tonight instead of humiliation? For the first time in years, Ralph felt something more than shame. He felt resolve. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe pride. Maybe anger at himself. But whatever it was, it lit a fire. He closed the notebook, but left it on the table, open to that page, as if daring himself not to look at it tomorrow. "No more broke," he whispered into the silence. And though he didn't know it yet, that one decision, the choice to save 10%, was about to change everything. What's worse than being broke? Pretending you're not. That thought hit Ralph the next Monday morning as he walked into his job in downtown Shreveport. The office buzzed with the sound of ringing phones, clacking keyboards, and the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Everyone looked tired, but everyone looked normal. Nobody would have guessed that just 2 nights ago, Ralph had walked out of a grocery store humiliated, unable to buy bread and milk. He slid into his cubicle, headset in place. The screen blinked with call logs, customer complaints, and the endless spreadsheets of his desk operator life. Jasmine, his coworker in the next cubicle, leaned over the divider. "Hey, Ralph. Rough weekend?" Ralph forced a chuckle. You could say that, but inside he was replaying every beep of that card machine. Declined, declined, declined. At lunch, while everyone scrolled Instagram or laughed about Friday night at Fatty Arbuckle's, Ralph pulled out the old notebook he had written in. On the page in angry, heavy letters. "No more broke. Save 10%. He stared at it. His paycheck wasn't big. After rent, gas, bills, and food, there wasn't much left. But maybe, just maybe, he could carve out 10%. The following Friday, payday hit. Ralph opened his banking app. His check was in. For a moment, he felt powerful. Then his bills list popped into his head: rent, utilities, car note, phone, groceries. He almost laughed at the idea of saving anything. But he remembered the grocery line, the whispers, the humiliation. Not this time. He drove straight to the ATM, withdrew a crisp envelope of cash, and counted out 10% of his paycheck. His hands shook as he sealed it. On the front, in bold black marker, he wrote, Freedom Fund. It wasn't much, just $84, but it felt like a million, because for the first time, he had money that wasn't already spoken for. Money that was his. That night, his co-workers were at the bar, posting pictures of shots lined up and karaoke on the patio. Ralph sat at his kitchen table, eating ramen noodles, staring at the envelope. It was small, laughably small, but it was real. He leaned back in his chair, smiled for the first time in days, and whispered, Step one. And in that tiny apartment, with ramen on his plate and an envelope of crumpled bills in front of him, Ralph had no idea that step one was the hardest step of all. For Ralph, that test came on a humid Thursday evening as he drove home along at 20. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple, Shreveport's skyline just visible in the distance. He was humming along to the radio, thinking about the envelope in his dresser drawer, the Freedom Fund, now holding almost $300 after a few paychecks. Then it happened. The engine sputtered. The car jerked. A warning light flared red. Ralph's heart dropped. He eased the Civic onto the shoulder, hazards flashing, trucks roaring past at 70 miles an hour. Smoke curled from under the hood. Ralph cursed under his breath. Not now. Please, not now. An hour later, he sat in the tow truck cab, the driver rambling about how old Hondas either run forever or die suddenly. Ralph barely heard him. His stomach was in knots. He already knew what the mechanic would say. The verdict: new alternator, belts, and labor. $640. Ralph stared at the bill, the numbers blurring. His Freedom Fund had $510. Months of sacrifice, ramen dinners, skipping happy hours, passing up on little pleasures so he could finally save. And now it was about to vanish in one swoop. He sat in the repair shop waiting room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, TV blaring local news no one was watching. He wanted to scream. What's the point of saving if life just takes it away? For a moment, he considered pulling out a credit card, pushing the problem to future Ralph. That's what he had always done. Swipe, delay, drown in debt later. But then the grocery store memory hit him. The beep of the card machine, the whispers, the humiliation. He opened his notebook. On the crumpled page, the words stared back at him. No more broke. Save 10%. His jaw tightened. He pulled out his envelope, handed over the cash, and felt the sting as the mechanic counted it. His Freedom Fund was wiped out. Gone. But something strange happened. For the first time in his life, he had faced a financial emergency, and he didn't borrow. No payday loan, no credit card trap, no begging. He paid cash. It hurt. Oh, it hurt. But it also felt powerful. Driving home in his repaired Civic, Ralph realized something. The setback wasn't the end. It was proof. Proof that saving worked. Proof that even when life punched him, he could take the hit and stay standing. He whispered to himself, we start again. 10%. Always, and he did. For Ralph, that door cracked open one quiet night in his small Shreveport apartment. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the table. He had just finished restuffing the Freedom Fund envelope, now thin again after the car disaster, but slowly growing back. Still, as he flipped through his notebook, he realized something. At the rate he was going, 10% savings meant safety, but not freedom. It meant he wouldn't starve. He might handle emergencies, but true wealth, the kind that could one day break him out of this paycheck to paycheck cycle, that wouldn't come from envelopes. Ralph leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. There has to be more. The next morning, during a rare lull at work, Jasmine dropped by his cubicle. She always had some article or joke to share. This time, she leaned over with her phone. You ever heard of compound interest? She asked. Ralph chuckled. Sounds like math trauma. She grinned. It's math magic. Look, she scrolled through an article showing how someone saving just $200 a month and investing it in the stock market could, over time, become a millionaire. Ralph squinted at the graph. The line started small, crawling upward, then curved and soared like a rocket. This is real? He whispered. Real as it gets, Jasmine said. The trick isn't saving alone. It's letting your money work for you. That night, Ralph couldn't sleep. He went down the rabbit hole, articles, YouTube videos, even podcasts while brushing his teeth. He learned about the stock market, index funds, dividends. Words that once seemed like they belonged to Wall Street sharks now felt like puzzle pieces sliding into place. But there was fear too. Every story of a crash, of people losing it all, echoed in his head. He barely had 1,000 saved. What if he lost it? The next week, his Freedom Fund envelope held $684. He sat at his desk staring at it. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, opened a brokerage app he had just set up, and hovered over the deposit button. His brain screamed, "Don't do it. What if the market crashes tomorrow?" But his heart whispered, "What if this is the step you've been waiting for?" He closed his eyes. Hit deposit. Transferred $200. The screen blinked. Transaction confirmed. Ralph exhaled, a long, shaky breath. It wasn't just money anymore. It was courage. As the night wore on, he wrote a new line in his notebook under No More Broke. Make money grow. And in that moment, sitting in his small apartment with ramen on the stove and a brokerage account barely started, Ralph had no idea that this single act of faith would change everything. At first, Ralph checked his brokerage app every day. The numbers didn't move much. A few cents here, a dollar there. It felt almost boring. But after 3 months, his balance had climbed past $1,000. For Ralph, that was more than money. It was proof. His money was working while he sat at a desk answering calls. Then one Friday night, he refreshed the app and nearly dropped his phone. His investments were up nearly $150 in a week. $150 for doing nothing. His jaw dropped. This is it. This is how people get rich. But the market giveth, and the market taketh away. The very next week, Ralph watched that $150 gain evaporate. Worse, his balance dipped below what he had originally invested. Red numbers glared at him like flashing alarms. Panic clawed at his chest. I worked so hard to save this. What if it all disappears? For 2 nights straight, he barely slept. At work, Jasmine noticed the dark circles under his eyes. You're checking it every hour, aren't you? She asked, smirking knowingly. Ralph sighed. I can't help it. I keep thinking I should just pull the money out before I lose it all. She leaned closer, her voice firm. Listen, the market goes up and down. That's normal. The trick isn't timing it, it's staying in long enough for time to work for you. Trust the process. Her words stuck with him. Trust the process. That weekend, Ralph made a decision. He deleted the brokerage app from his home screen. Instead of watching every swing, he would focus on what he could control, adding 10% of every paycheck, no matter what. Months passed. His account slowly climbed again. He still felt doubt sometimes, but there was a shift inside him. He realized wealth wasn't built in weeks or months. It was built in years. One evening, he opened his notebook and wrote under his old vow, wealth is patience. And for the first time, Ralph didn't just believe in saving, he believed in waiting. Ralph sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the notification on his phone. The familiar green numbers blinked across the screen. Dividend payout received, $212.47. For a moment, he just blinked, not sure if it was real. This wasn't a paycheck. This wasn't overtime. This was money he hadn't lifted a finger for. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Just a year ago, he'd been standing in that grocery store with his card declining, heat rising in his cheeks as people behind him sighed, and a baby wailed. Now his money was making money. But the road hadn't been smooth. The markets had played tricks on him. Some weeks his portfolio looked like a sinking ship, red numbers dragging his spirit down. He'd nearly deleted the app more than once, telling himself investing was just a gamble dressed up in fancy words. Yet every time, he remembered the sting of that checkout line. He remembered the shame and the quiet promise he made to himself. Never again. At work, even his coworkers started to notice a shift in him. He wasn't snapping at small annoyances anymore. He walked into the office with a quiet confidence, carrying a small notebook where he tracked his savings and investments. Ralph, you hit the lottery or something? One of his coworkers teased as they poured coffee. Ralph smiled. Not the lottery, just discipline. The real breakthrough came when he realized it wasn't about getting rich overnight. It was about building systems. His 10% savings habit had grown automatic, like brushing his teeth. Every paycheck, he didn't think twice. It went straight to his investment account. And as the months turned into years, the compounding effect began to show its magic. One late evening, he opened his laptop and did the math. If he kept this up, just this steady, boring, disciplined saving and investing, he could reach financial freedom far earlier than he ever imagined. He wouldn't just survive between paychecks, he could thrive. Ralph closed the laptop and leaned back, a smile spreading across his face. He'd cracked something most people never do. Wealth wasn't about luck, it was about patience, habit, and resilience. And now he could feel financial freedom wasn't just a dream, it was closing in. The Louisiana sun was sinking low, painting the Shreveport skyline in amber and gold. Ralph sat on the porch of his modest but fully paid off home, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. The same man who once stood in a crowded grocery store, humiliated by a declined card, was now debt free, financially independent, and, most importantly, at peace. His phone buzzed. It was another dividend notification, this time larger than some of his old paychecks. He glanced at it, smiled faintly, and slipped the phone face down onto the table. The money wasn't what moved him anymore. It was the freedom, the ability to choose how he spent his days, who he gave his time to, and what legacy he wanted to leave. Earlier that week, he had walked back into his old office, not as a desk operator, but as a guest speaker for a financial wellness workshop. His old coworkers looked at him in disbelief. Some had whispered, "Is that Ralph? The guy who used to brown bag lunch every single day?" He had chuckled softly as he stood in front of them, sharing his story. He didn't glamorize it. He talked about the nights of doubt, the temptation to quit, the constant pressure to spend instead of save. But he also told them about the power of small, consistent actions, about how saving just 10% of every paycheck had planted seeds that grew into a forest. Financial freedom isn't about never working again, Ralph had told them. It's about choice. It's about not living at the mercy of a paycheck or a credit card. It's about building a future where you're in control, not the bank. Now, as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, Ralph reflected on how far he'd come. That one humiliating moment at the checkout line had been the catalyst, a blessing disguised as embarrassment. He opened his notebook, the same one he used years ago when he first scribbled, "Make money grow." Flipping to the last page, he wrote 3 words in bold letters: "Never again broke." And this time, it wasn't a desperate promise. It was a truth he had built, dollar by dollar, habit by habit. Ralph leaned back, a smile settling on his face. He had cracked the code, and now he was free.